Woody? Dave Miller here. Need a quote on a raised platform deck in my backyard. Hey, Dave. Woody's voice was cheerful. Sure thing. Got dimensions in mind? Materials? I explained the 12x16 size, the low height, the composite decking. And, I added casually, I was thinking of adding a simple pergola-style frame around the front edge. Just 4 posts and a beam across the top. Woody paused. Pergola frame? On the front of a low deck? Usually those go over the top, for shade, or stand alone. What's it for? I improvised. Hanging plants? Yeah, hanging baskets. And maybe some outdoor curtains? For, sun protection. Woody sounded skeptical. Curtains? On a deck pergola? Huh. Okay, weird, but easy enough to frame out. Yeah, we can build that. Need city permits for a deck that size, Absolutely, I said. By the book. Let me paint you a picture. My backyard, typical suburban plot here in sunny Ohio. Nice green grass, mowed to HOA-approved height, naturally. A sturdy swing set, pre-approved, thankfully. And, until recently, the crown jewel. The majestic Starlight Puppet Theater. Okay, maybe the name was a bit grand. It was mostly constructed from plywood, 2x4S, and leftover paint from the garage. I built it with my kids, Lily, who was 8 and the budding playwright-director, and Tom, 10, the chief sock puppet operator and sound effects guy. Mostly raspberries. It wasn't small, I'll give the HOA that. Stood about 6 feet tall, maybe 5 feet wide, with a proper little stage opening, red velvet curtains I found on clearance, and painted in bright, cheerful colors utterly inconsistent with the neighborhood's official palette of grayish expectation and taupe dreams. But man, the kids loved that thing. They spent hours out there, putting on elaborate productions for me, my wife, Laura, and occasionally the bewildered dog from next door. Sir Reginald the brave sock puppet battled dragons, space aliens landed in the azaleas, historical dramas unfolded with questionable accuracy, but maximum enthusiasm. It was pure imaginative joy. It kept them outside, away from screens. It was, in my humble opinion, a triumph of fatherhood and scrap lumber. Mrs. Gable, whose immaculate backyard bordered ours, separated only by HOA-mandated, low-profile shrubs, did not agree. I'd see her peering over the greenery while Lily and Tom were mid-performance, her face pinched like she'd just smelled sour milk. She never complained about the noise. The kids were loud, sure, but it was happy kid noise, usually drowned out by lawnmowers or the distant wail of the teenager down the street learning electric guitar. No, it was the structure itself that offended her sensibilities. The first volley was indirect. A passive-aggressive comment during the neighborhood block party. "David," she'd said, eyeing the theater peeking over my shrubs, "such vibrant colors on that playhouse? Doesn't quite blend with the natural landscape, does it?" "It's a puppet theater, Carol," I'd replied cheerfully. "Supposed to be fun." She'd responded, already making mental notes for her next HOA complaint. The official notice arrived a week later. Cream envelope, HOA logo. The usual harbinger of doom. "Dear Mr. Miller," it began, "it has come to the attention of the Architectural Review Committee, ARC, that an unapproved play structure has been erected in your rear yard." Play structure? It was practically the Globe Theater. "As per Bylaw 27, Section C," it continued, "all detached play structures exceeding 4 feet in height or 20 square feet in area require prior written approval from the ARC to ensure aesthetic harmony and compliance with community standards. Furthermore, materials must consist of natural wood tones or approved neutral composite materials. The structure in question, they couldn't even bring themselves to call it a puppet theater, appears to exceed dimensional limitations and utilizes non-approved colors and potentially non-compliant materials. Painted plywood? Please remove the non-compliant structure within 14 days. 14 days. To dismantle my kids' pride and joy, I was furious. I immediately requested a hearing. The meeting was as pleasant as a root canal performed by grumpy badgers. Me, armed with photos of the kids happily playing, arguing it was a harmless, temporary structure, even though I'd built it pretty solidly, that it fostered creativity, that the colors were cheerful. I offered to repaint it beige. I offered to plant taller shrubs around it, which would probably also violate some other bylaw. Mrs. Gable was there, naturally, as the concerned citizen complainant and an ARC committee member. Conflict of interest, anyone? She presented her case with grim determination. "It's far too large, Mr. President," she addressed the HOA head, a guy named Henderson who always looked vaguely confused. "It looks like a shantytown structure. It's visible from my upstairs window. The bright colors are jarring. And when the children," she shuddered slightly, "congregate back there for their performances, the noise level becomes quite disruptive." Noise level? It was kids yelling, "Look out, Sir Reginald! Not a rock concert!" Henderson sighed, adjusted his glasses. "David," he said, avoiding my gaze, "the bylaws are quite specific. Size limits, pre-approval required, approved materials and colors. Your structure fails on multiple counts. We appreciate the creativity, but rules are rules. To maintain community standards, the official HOA mantra, it must be removed. No variance, no compromise. Just remove it." Telling the kids was rough. Lily cried. Tom kicked the tires on my car. Taking the theater apart piece by piece felt like vandalism. We saved the curtains and the puppets, storing Sir Reginald and his cohorts in a box in the garage, awaiting a theater that no longer existed. I stood there that evening, looking at the empty patch of grass where the theater used to be. The silence felt wrong. My kids were crushed. And all because Mrs. Gable didn't like bright colors, and the HOA had bylaws written by soulless robots obsessed with beige. They hate imagination? I thought, anger simmering. They hate a little homemade fun? They think that theater was too big, too permanent? A new idea, born of frustration and a desire to give my kids back their creative space, started to form. Fine. If they don't want a puppet theater, maybe they'll prefer a real one. My initial thought wasn't even malicious. It was practical. The kids were bummed. They missed putting on their shows. What else could they use? Maybe just a blanket over a clothesline? No, too flimsy. Maybe a platform? Like a little stage they could perform on? Then the spite kicked in. If the HOA hated the look of the puppet theater, the homemade vibe, the bright colors, the enclosed structure, maybe they wouldn't object as much to something more architectural, something open, something that looked less like a playhouse and more like, well, like a deck. People had decks. Decks were allowed, with permits and ARC approval, of course. What if I built a deck? A raised wooden platform right where the puppet theater used to be. But not just a flat deck. A deck with purpose. A deck designed for performance. A stage. The idea blossomed. A sturdy, raised platform, maybe 12x 16 feet. Big enough for elaborate productions or just lounging in chairs. Steps leading up. And maybe a simple frame around the front. Not enclosed, just a suggestion of a proscenium arch. Something to hang lights from or curtains. My mind raced. I pulled out the HOA bylaws again, this time looking for rules on decks, patios, and platforms. Section 15, Decks and Patios. Required ARC approval specified certain materials, wood, composite, limited height, usually relative to the first floor of the house, required approved stain colors. shades of brown and gray, naturally. But crucially, it didn't say much about the use of the deck, as long as it wasn't, say, running a business off it. And the size limits for decks were generally much larger than for play structures. Then I checked city building codes. Raised platforms over a certain height, usually 30 inches, needed permits and railings. Mine would be lower, maybe 24 inches, potentially avoiding the railing requirement. Electrical work for outdoor outlets or lighting? Definitely needed permits and a licensed electrician. This could work. It was sneaky. It was ambitious. It was definitely overkill. It was perfect. I started sketching. A solid, pressure-treated wood frame. Composite decking in an HOA-approved shade of cedar sunset. Wide steps leading up. And that proscenium-style frame around the front. Maybe just 4x4 posts and a connecting beam stained to match. Looked like a pergola, sort of. A pergola specifically designed for theatrical endeavors. Time to bring in the professionals. This needed to look legit, built to code, to give the HOA less ammunition. I called Woody, a local carpenter whose crew had built my neighbor Jim's impressive HOA-approved deck last year. "Woody, Dave Miller here. Need a quote on a raised platform deck in my backyard?" "Hey, Dave." Woody's voice was cheerful. "Sure thing. Got dimensions in mind? Materials?" I explained the 12x16 size, the low height, the composite decking. And, I added casually, I was thinking of adding a simple pergola-style frame around the front edge. Just 4 posts and a beam across the top. Woody paused. "Pergola frame on the front of a low deck? Usually those go over the top for shade or stand alone. What's it for?" I improvised. "Hanging plants. Yeah, hanging baskets. And maybe some outdoor curtains? For, sun protection." Woody sounded skeptical. "Curtains? On a deck pergola, huh?" "Okay, weird, but easy enough to frame out." "Yeah, we can build that. Need city permits for a deck that size, "Absolutely," I said. "By the book." Next, electrical. I needed power for potential stage lights. Maybe a small sound system for the kids' elaborate sound effects. I called Sparky Steve. Yes, the same Sparky from the, previous project that I definitely don't remember. He remembered me somehow. "Dave Miller!" Sparky exclaimed. "What crazy project you got for me this time? Don't tell me you're automating your mailbox?" "Nothing that crazy, Sparky," I laughed. "Just need some outdoor electrical run for a new deck platform Woody's building." "Okay, standard stuff, couple weatherproof outlets, maybe some low-voltage step lights?" "Outlets, yes," I confirmed. "On the platform itself. But also, could you run conduit up the posts of this pergola frame that Woody's building around the front? Just stub it out in junction boxes near the top beam? For potential future accent lighting?" Sparky was silent for a beat. Accent lighting? Or spotlights? "Could be spotlights," I admitted sheepishly. "Just want the option, flexibility." Sparky sighed. "Flexibility, right. You building a stage out there, Dave?" "It's a multi-purpose entertainment platform," I insisted. "Uh-huh," Sparky said, clearly not buying it. "Okay, I can run the conduit. Make sure whatever accent lights you install are outdoor rated and don't overload the circuit, all right? And get the permit." Permits secured for a raised wooden deck/platform with pergola frame and associated electrical. Contractors hired, materials ordered, in HOA-approved cedar sunset, naturally. Operation Center Stage was ready for Act 1. Laura, my wife, just shook her head when I showed her the final plans and Woody's quote. "A performance deck, huh?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Just try not to get us sued this time, okay, Arthur Miller?" I promised I'd try. Woody and his crew were efficient. They started by setting the support posts in concrete footings, way more substantial than the puppet theater ever had. Then came the framing for the 12x16 platform, about 2 feet off the ground. Pressure-treated lumber, joists perfectly spaced, everything level and square. It already looked solid, permanent. Neighbors started noticing, naturally. "Putting in a big deck, Dave," called Jim from across the street, pausing his lawnmower. "Yep," I yelled back. "Platform for outdoor entertaining." Which was technically true. Mrs. Gable watched the proceedings from her kitchen window like a hawk, monitoring a particularly suspicious field mouse. I could almost feel her disapproval radiating across the lawn. She hadn't said anything directly yet, probably waiting to see the finished product before lodging her official complaint with the HOA Star Chamber. Sparky Steve came by and ran the electrical conduit before the decking went down, installing 2 weatherproof GFCI outlets on the side of the platform frame, and running conduit up the 4 main posts of the pergola frame Woody was now constructing around the front edge. This frame was simple, just sturdy 4x4 posts with a connecting beam across the top. But combined with the raised platform, the effect was undeniable. It screamed stage. Woody's crew started laying the composite decking Cedar Sunset, a perfectly acceptable HOA shade of brownish gray. Click, screw, click, screw. The platform surface came together quickly. They built wide, sturdy steps leading up from the lawn. By the end of the second week, the main structure was complete. It looked impressive, solid, professional, and absolutely nothing like a simple deck. It was a stage, plain and simple. Woody, packing up his tools, surveyed his handiwork. "Well, there she is, Dave," he said, scratching his head. "One sturdy platform with a weird curtain-hanging frame thingy. Whatever you crazy kids are gonna do on it, it ain't going nowhere." He winked. "Break a leg." The HOA, meanwhile, had clearly been notified. Thanks, Gable. I received a polite but firm letter requesting copies of the ARC approval for the deck/platform structure. I sent back copies of my city permits for the raised wooden deck/platform and the electrical work, along with a note stating that the materials, composite decking, pressure-treated frame, approved stain color, complied with HOA guidelines as outlined in Bylaw 15, and therefore, as a permitted structure using compliant materials, further ARC review wasn't necessary. It was a gamble, stretching the interpretation of the rules, but I figured attack was the best defense. That weekend, I couldn't resist adding the finishing touches. I went out and bought 4 cheap but effective outdoor LED spotlights and clamped them securely onto the top beam of the proscenium frame, wiring them into the junction boxes Sparky had installed. I even found some dark green, weather-resistant fabric on sale and rigged up simple, temporary curtains inside the frame using tension rods. Then I called the kids. "Lily, Tom, come check out the new deck." Their eyes went wide when they saw it. The disappointment over the lost puppet theater vanished instantly. "Dad," Lily gasped, "it's a real stage." "Whoa, can we put on a play, like right now?" Tom asked, already striking a dramatic pose center stage. "Absolutely," I grinned, grabbing the remote for the spotlights I'd rigged up. "Places, everyone?" I flipped the switch. The 4 spotlights illuminated the small stage, creating a surprisingly effective theatrical space against the backdrop of our darkening backyard. Lily immediately started directing Tom in an improvised drama involving a lost puppy and space aliens. Laura came out, watched for a moment, and just shook her head, smiling despite herself. "You're ridiculous, David Miller." "Maybe," I admitted. "But look how happy they are." Across the way, Mrs. Gable's porch light flicked on. Her silhouette stood motionless in the window, watching. I could almost hear the furious clicking of her phone as she documented this latest, most theatrical infraction. The intermission was definitely over. The HOA's reaction to the fully realized backyard theater stage was, shall we say, less than enthusiastic. The polite inquiries ceased. The violation notices began arriving with the frequency and intensity of mortar shells. First came the predictable salvos. Violation notice, unauthorized use of approved structure. Apparently, deck, platform, did not implicitly include staging theatrical productions. Violation notice, installation of non-approved theatrical lighting fixtures. My cheap LED spotlights were deemed offensive. Violation notice, potential noise nuisance, anticipatory. They were already fining me for noise I hadn't even made yet. Violation notice, aesthetic disharmony, installation of commercial theatrical apparatus in residential zone. The curtains, probably. They demanded the immediate cessation of all theatrical activities and the removal of the offending theatrical elements, specifically the lights, the curtains, and the proscenium-style pergola frame. The underlying deck platform, being city-permitted and built with approved materials, was harder for them to attack directly, though they hinted darkly about revisiting its permit status based on misrepresentation of intended use. Daily fines were assessed for each violation. My mailbox looked like it was being stalked by an angry process server. Then came the inevitable noise complaint, triggered, I suspect, less by actual noise and more by Mrs. Gable's hyper-vigilance. We decided to host a premiere for Lily and Tom's latest masterpiece, The Mystery of the Missing Hamster, for a few family friends and supportive neighbors one Saturday afternoon. We had maybe 10 guests total. The kids used the little battery-powered karaoke machine speaker I'd bought them, turned down low. It was adorable. It was wholesome. It was, according to Mrs. Gable's subsequent 911 call, an unpermitted public performance causing significant auditory disturbance. 2 police officers arrived just as the hamster villain, played by a reluctant sock puppet, was delivering his climactic monologue. They looked profoundly bored. "Afternoon, folks," the first officer sighed, surveying the scene kids in makeshift costumes on a backyard stage, small audience in lawn chairs, tiny speaker crackling. "Getting complaints about excessive noise and maybe an unpermitted public event?" "Officer," I said, walking over. "Just my kids putting on a little play for family friends. Using this tiny speaker here," I pointed. "Volume is way down, just backyard fun." The second officer tilted his head, listening. "Doesn't seem too loud from here. Sounds like hamsters?" "The Mystery of the Missing Hamster," Lily piped up proudly from the stage. "I wrote it." The first officer cracked a small smile. "Right. Look, sir, as long as the amplified sound isn't violating the daytime noise ordinance." It clearly wasn't. "And it's a private gathering on your property. There's not much we can do. Tell your neighbors to relax." They gave a nod and left, leaving Mrs. Gable, who was watching from her window, fuming. The HOA, however, wasn't giving up. They complained to city code enforcement, arguing that the use of the permitted deck as a stage constituted a zoning violation or required a different permit class, like place of assembly or home occupation. Inspector Frank, yes, him again, the poor guy must have my address memorized, showed up the following week. He looked at the stage, the lights, currently off, the city permit for the deck. "Mr. Miller," he said tiredly, "the HOA is alleging you're operating a performance venue here, which isn't permitted in an R1 residential zone." "Frank, come on," I protested. "It's a deck, a permitted deck. Sometimes my kids put on plays for their grandparents on it. Sometimes I sit out here and read. It's recreational use of my property." "What about the spotlights, the proscenium frame?" he countered, pointing. "The frame is part of the permitted pergola structure. I argued. And the lights are just accent lighting, like people put on their landscaping. Frank sighed and made notes. Okay, look. The lighting might push the limits of standard residential fixtures, especially if they cause glare onto neighboring properties. And if these plays become frequent, large, or involve amplified sound late at night, you could cross the line into nuisance territory or even place of assembly rules depending on attendance. He handed me a notice. This isn't a violation yet, but consider it a formal warning. Keep the use incidental to residential enjoyment, keep the noise down, keep the lights aimed appropriately, and don't host anything that looks like a public event. The city will be monitoring. So another partial victory, another warning. The stage remained, but its use was under scrutiny. The HOA fines continued to pile up, now citing the potential for nuisance based on the structure's intended use. It was clear this was heading for a final showdown. Time to call my lawyer buddy again. The inevitable emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled. Final determination and enforcement action regarding unauthorized theatrical structure and associated nuisance activities at 112 Maple Lane. This time, I knew they meant business. They'd likely authorized their lawyer to attend and were prepared to vote on funding a lawsuit to force removal or modification. I came prepared too, with my lawyer, Dave Miller, the real one, not me, copies of city permits, code enforcement reports, showing no current violations, and photos of other neighbors' decks that had pergolas or extensive lighting to argue selective enforcement. The meeting was tense. Mrs. Gable sat with the board, whispering furiously to President Henderson, "Yes, let's bring that Henderson back for this finale, he feels right." Their lawyer, Mr. Loophole, presented first. He argued that while the deck platform might have a city permit, its design and use clearly constituted an unapproved theatrical stage that violated multiple aesthetic bylaws, noise ordinances, by potential, light pollution rules, and the fundamental residential character of Oak Haven Estates. He portrayed me as a rogue homeowner deliberately flouting rules and creating a nuisance. He demanded the board authorize legal action to compel removal of the proscenium frame, the lighting fixtures, and issue a permanent injunction against any performance activities. Then Dave Miller stepped up. He was calm, methodical. He reiterated that the platform itself was permitted by the city. He argued that the proscenium frame was permitted as a pergola element. He pointed out that the lighting fixtures were standard outdoor-rated LEDs, currently aimed downwards and not violating any specific city light pollution ordinance. He emphasized that use for private, family recreational activities, like children's plays during reasonable hours, did not constitute a nuisance under city code, nor was it a commercial activity. What this boils down to, Dave concluded, is the HOA attempting to regulate, through subjective aesthetic interpretation and anticipatory nuisance claims, the private recreational use of a city-permitted structure built with HOA-approved materials. We believe such action constitutes overreach and would likely not prevail in court, while incurring significant legal costs for the association. Then I spoke, trying to channel calm reason. "Look," I said to the board and the assembled residents, "this started because you made me tear down my kids' puppet theater, a simple homemade thing that brought them joy. I replaced it with a permitted structure, built to code, using approved materials. My kids use it to play, to be creative, sometimes with a few friends over. Is that really so terrible? Is that really destroying the character of this neighborhood more than, say, enforcing rules with such rigidity that it crushes a kid's spirit?" There were murmurs in the room. I saw a few sympathetic nods. Mrs. Gable looked like she was about to explode. President Henderson conferred nervously with Mr. Loophole. After a tense deliberation, and likely a stark warning from their lawyer about the potential costs and weak legal standing on the use issue, the board reached a decision. It wasn't the complete victory I'd hoped for, but it wasn't the demolition order they craved either. The resolution: structure stays, mostly. The main deck platform and the proscenium pergola frame were acknowledged as permitted and could remain. Lighting restrictions: the spotlights were deemed non-standard. I had to remove them or replace them with lower wattage, downward-facing accent lights, pre-approved by the ARC. Fine, I could live with that. Use limitations: no amplified sound allowed without prior ARC notification. Not approval, just notification. Performances to be infrequent for private audiences only, and conclude by dusk. Basically, codifying what I was already doing. Fines rescinded. All outstanding fines related to the stage use and lighting would be rescinded upon compliance with the lighting restriction. Fines related to the original puppet theater remained. I'd already paid those under protest. It was a compromise heavily weighted in my favor. They saved face by getting the spotlights removed, but the stage itself survived. I declared victory. So now, life with the backyard stage is the new normal. I replaced the spotlights with some subtle, ARC-approved LED accent lights that still illuminate the stage area nicely. The kids still put on plays. Hamlet with hamsters was their latest triumph, for family and a few close friends. We keep the volume down, finish before dark. Mrs. Gable still glares, but she hasn't filed any new complaints about the stage. She seems to have moved on to obsessing over someone's non-compliant bird bath. The stage has become a quirky neighborhood landmark. Some neighbors think I'm eccentric. Some think I stood up to the HOA bullies. Most just accept it. Was it worth the fight? The cost of the stage, way more than the puppet theater. The stress, the endless meetings and letters. Sitting here on a Sunday afternoon, watching Lily and Tom rehearse their next masterpiece on their stage, hearing their laughter echo in the backyard? Yeah, it absolutely was. You can't crush creativity, even with bylaws. Sometimes you just need to build it a bigger stage. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think Sir Reginald the Brave Sock Puppet is due for a comeback tour. Encore!